Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us. Whether you're here with us or you're watching our recording on our website. Um, this is a discussion for our out-of-state counselors centered around scholarships and financial aid, so affordability at Purdue. My name is Karini Maria Contreras Nunez. I'm one of the senior assistant directors at the Office of Admissions. I'm excited to be here today. And alongside me, I have Danik and David. I will let you guys introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Danik Tori, and I'm a Senior Associate Director in the Office of Admissions, and I primarily work with international students at Purdue.
Hi, I'm David Rizay. I'm an Assistant Director of Financial Aid at Purdue, and I primarily work with student employment and also our outreach programs.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. So um, throughout this discussion, we're really going to start by talking about, our costs at the university, and we're going to move on to discussing scholarships for international domestic students on an institutional level. And we're going to be giving you some hints and some tips as you're advising your students so they can be more competitive in the scholarship review process. And then we'll move into a discussion of financial aid, which David will take over and share all of his financial aid knowledge with all of us. And lastly, we'll wrap up by talking about unique opportunities at Purdue for students to reduce their costs. So I'm really excited to kind of dive right on in here. First, I want to talk about our cost of attendance. And what's unique about Purdue when compared to other institutions is that we've actually frozen our cost of attendance since 2012. So that is a very, very unique thing to our institution. Most universities, as far as I've heard, increase their cost of attendance by about 3 to 5% annually, which is why you get those very large sticker prices. And as you all know, because most of you, I'm assuming most of you have taken calculus and higher level math, this compounds over time, right? So as students are going through their academic programs at other institutions, that cost is actually incrementally growing over those years while they're enrolled. I'm going to share my screen with you all very quickly so that you can see on our website what our cost of attendance looks like. For our non-resident students, our cost of attendance is just shy of $29,000. Room and board this is an estimate. So it's about $10,000. It could be more or it can be less, but this is on average what our students tend to pay for a subtotal of about $39,000. And that's pretty affordable when you consider that other institutions are $60,000, $70,000, even $80,000 a year for attendance. The other estimated expenses, we are not going to charge students, for example, for books, transportation, and supplies, but these are costs that parents should have in mind as they're considering not just Purdue, but other universities across the country. Beneath that, you will see additional costs for certain programs. For example, computer science, data science, and engineering. That's an additional cost, about $2,050. This is for all of their materials and their lab needs. Some programs that also have additional costs are management at just shy of $1,500, and Purdue Polytechnic is just it's shy of about $600 of an additional fee. When it comes to our professional flight program, I would highly recommend checking out the Office of the Bursar on their website, as our flight program's costs are a little bit different. So definitely something to consider. And for the Honors College, for students that are enrolled, it's an additional $200. When it comes to our international student population, it's just a little bit more. So it's about 31,000 approximately for tuition and fees, and then room and board stays consistent. So the billed expenses are just a little over 40,000, about $41,000. And again, we have maintained our costs for the past 8 years. So it is an amazing feat that we've been able to do that. And it's one of the ways that we're demonstrating our affordability to our students and to our families. Danik, is there anything you want to share about our international students, cost of attendance, et cetera, before we continue?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Karini, for doing the overview of the tuition and fees. For international students, Karini showed the tuition and fees, and typically the total cost is about 40 to 45,000 US dollars for our international students. We're going to be talking a lot about scholarships and financial aid during this session, and I just want to be clear that international students do not qualify for merit scholarships or need-based financial aid at Purdue University. So we always want to be as transparent as possible about that and let our international students know if they do apply to Purdue, it's very unlikely that they're going to get a merit-based scholarship when they apply to Purdue. So those opportunities are typically reserved only for U.S. citizens or permanent residents of the United States. I will say there is a small population of international students that will qualify to be considered for scholarships, and those are going to be international students who are in the United States on a dependent visa. So typically their parents are here working and living in the United States, and they're here on typically an H or an L visa are the most popular ones we see. So those students do qualify to be considered for our merit scholarships and opportunities. So if they will follow the same deadlines, which is November 1st, just like any other student to be considered for scholarships and financial aid. So just keep that in mind if we have any international students or international counselors to keep that in mind when we're talking about scholarships and financial aid for Purdue. Thanks, Granny.
And as we continue right along, I want to talk about scholarships and our scholarship review process at Purdue. I just think it's really important for counselors to have a general sense of how we review students, not just for admissions, but also for scholarship consideration. I'm going to share my screen again, and I am bringing you to our freshman admission criteria. And typically speaking, students will just look at this website when they are looking to see how their application would be evaluated for admissions purposes at the university. However, we use the same criteria to evaluate students for scholarship consideration. So the way that it works is that a file is, when it's reviewed by our counseling staff, is simultaneously reviewed for admissions and for scholarship consideration. Once we determine that the student is admissible to the program of their choice, then we do a deeper dive and a deeper look to see how they stand in comparison to the rest of the application pool. And based on that standing, we can nominate a student for scholarship consideration. So that's really important to be aware of because it's not based on just this test score and just this GPA automatically sends a student into scholarship consideration. We're not really looking at that. What we're primarily focusing on are the curriculums. We really want students that have challenged themselves academically in comparison to their peers and, relative to what is available at their high school. Some other things that we really prioritize are those extracurricular activities. And I know this year is a little bit different because COVID did impact students significantly on the opportunities that they were able to take advantage of in the spring and also in the summer and perhaps in this fall as well. But this year, it could be a really great time for them to talk about different activities that they started doing while they were in quarantine, right? Like, I know all of us had our own ways of keeping busy. And, in my case, I started a food Instagram account, posting all the breads that I was making. But I know that the students also develop different hobbies and different interests, and we really want to hear what those are. We're trying to admit students with a variety of different, perspectives and interests. And oftentimes students, especially students that want to get into competitive programs like engineering, they think that they just need to be involved in engineering related activities, and that is not true. Some of the most compelling applications are from students that explore alternative interests in other areas. So as you're advising your students to fill out their application, if they want to be strong contenders for our scholarship review process, it is extremely important that they emphasize those elements and activities that they are involved in, that they're actually really passionate about, because we will be able to see that passion through their application, right? We can tell when a student is being authentic with us and when they're just sharing things because they think that that's what we want to hear. And what we want to hear is an authentic voice. We want to hear authenticity from that person. We admit people, we don't admit numbers, right? That for us is extremely important. Something else that we place a lot of emphasis on in scholarship review is the essay. So at Purdue, we do not conduct interviews. This means that the essay is the one opportunity that a student has to directly communicate, not just with the admission staff, but with the committee for the program that they're applying to, and the potential committee for scholarship selection. So the essay is really that lens into the student, their experiences, their values, their ethics, and we really take time to thoroughly and thoughtfully consider student scholarships during that review. Students' essays during that scholarship review. There are different essays. So there's the general Common App essay, and then there are two smaller Purdue supplemental essays. The first one is why Purdue? Why are you interested in our institution? And the second one is why major? Why are you interested in the particular major that you're applying to? These are extremely important as we review students for scholarship and admission based on the academic college and or academic program that they are applying to. So we want to make sure that if we're awarding a scholarship to a student, we are doing so for those students that are really interested in Purdue and in the academic programs that they are applying to. So this is another great way for your students to become competitive in the scholarship selection process, is to really think about why are they interested in Purdue? What programs, activities, research, internship opportunities are unique to Purdue that they want to participate in? The same goes for their academic program, right? So we want to make sure that we are selecting students who are genuinely interested in their academic programs. And this is important because if a student is awarded a scholarship, it is a scholarship for that particular college, and they cannot change their major within their first year of enrollment at the university. So we really want to make sure that we are awarding these scholarships to students that are not going to switch their major and that are really curious and interested in the areas to which they are applying into. So this is really important information for you to share with your students who want to be really competitive in that scholarship selection process. And then last but not least, we really take into consideration that personal background and experience. Context is everything for Purdue. It has been in the past, and it continues to be through this COVID-19 pandemic. Historically, I've used the example of, of trees, germinating and flourishing depending on their climate, right? Like if you take a coconut tree and you bring it to Maine, that tree is not going to flourish, right? So we pay very close attention to the contextual nature of the environment of the student, because that is really significant as to how that student flourishes throughout their years in high school. If a student did not have access to taking, 21 different AP classes, if they didn't have access to internship and research opportunities, that will be something that we consider. But if a student did have access to that, and they chose, or they were, they just didn't prioritize that in their high school experience, we're going to be able to also tell, right? So we are looking at students contextually. We always have. And this year, our mantra is reviewing students in the context of COVID-19. So there's an additional essay section that students can fill out to talk about the impact of COVID. And I strongly recommend that you encourage each and every single one of your students to complete that, because that'll give us the necessary contextual information that we need in order to determine, how COVID-19 impacted and restricted this student, and to sort of think about if COVID-19 were not there, what would these experiences look like for this person, right? And the impact of COVID-19 was different for everyone. I'm originally from New York City. I grew up there. So New York City really struggled in many different ways. But when you consider a student who's maybe in South Dakota, for example, where their infection rates were not nearly at the same level, they might have had a different experience too. And we will consider those factors as we're selecting for scholarship review this year. With regards to university-wide scholarships, those are awarded predominantly by the Office of Admissions. And when you look at the numbers, it's approximately 10% by academic program. This is a very, very key point that I'm making here, because sometimes a student that applied to an extremely competitive program may have had on paper better credentials than a student who applied to a program that may not be as competitive. For example, a student that applied to a competitive program like professional flight, where they are very restricted in the amount of students that they can accept because we only have so many planes on our campus, compared to a program like, I don't know, just our general management program where there's a little bit more space in that academic college. The competitive nature of that scholarship selection process is going to be different. So you might have students come up to you and say, hey, I on paper have better scores or better grades than XYZ student, but I did not get a scholarship. And that is because we review students for scholarship selection by academic college. So that application pool for that academic program is extremely important. We, since we're reviewing for admissions and recommending students for scholarship consideration simultaneously, you really want to encourage students to be authentic, because authenticity is what pops, right? If you're reviewing students that are just trying to tell you the things that you want to hear, you tend to find a lot of overlap in those student experiences, right? Like they think, oh, I'm applying to engineering, so I have to talk about all the engineering things that I've done. When the reality is that we're looking for dynamic individuals as we're selecting scholarship consideration. Was there anything that I missed there, Danik and David, before I turn it over to David to talk about financial aid?
No, I think that was a good, solid overview.
Yep, I do too.
Excellent. So, David, you can steal the show.
All right. Well, I'm going to share our Division of Financial Aid website homepage. And so the first thing I would tell your students that pursuing a degree is an important investment. It's both an investment in their time and also a monetary investment for them and their families. So if families haven't really started thinking about paying for college yet, they need to start doing that right away. A lot of families, start very early in the student's career in the elementary years, and that's a good thing. But yeah, if they haven't started thinking yet in the high school years, they're a little late, or a little late to the program, but they should really start putting a plan in place now. The key to getting financial aid at Purdue and really most colleges, though, is to file a free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form. And this is a timely discussion because the 2021-22 FAFSA actually opened today, October 1st, when we're doing this recording. The 2021-22 FAFSA will look at 2019 income information. So it's good for the families to get their tax returns or W-2s all in order before they start filling the FAFSA out. Now, just because the FAFSA opened today, October 1, that doesn't really mean that families need to do it today or in the next couple of days. They really just want to make sure they have all of their information in order first and then file. Purdue's priority filing date is actually March 1st, so students have until then, all the way from October 1 to March 1st of 2021 to get their FAFSA into us, and they'll still be considered for the different types of financial aid. Our website, if they go under the student tab and then how to apply, we have quite a bit of information about filing the FAFSA and what's involved and what forms that families need. It's all done online through the Federal Student Aid website. So at fafsa.gov, that goes directly to the FAFSA site. A key component is both the student, and the FAFSA is always in the name of the student, so both the student and a parent need a federal student aid ID to electronically sign the FAFSA. Now, they need separate IDs, so it's not the same one for both the student and the parent, but that's really important. The FAFSA says they can get that in real time, but I've never really found that to be the case. So I would encourage both the student and a parent to go out to this federal student aid website and get an FSA ID first. Karini did a great job talking about the merit scholarships. To be in the pool for those scholarships, you have to have a complete admissions application on file by November 1st. And so that's a key date that's coming up in just about a month. So make sure that you do that. Now, a lot of out-of-state students and families, parents usually will say, we know we make too much money, so we're not even going to file a FAFSA. There are a couple of reasons that families should consider filing regardless of their income. One would be if the student is ever eligible or interested in taking out any of the federal student loans. You have to have a FAFSA on file, and I'll talk about loans here more in just a couple minutes. And then if something happens in the to the family that they weren't expecting, such as a job loss of a parent, or hopefully this doesn't happen, but the death of a parent, or possibly a huge medical bill that they weren't expecting, we might be able to sit down with that family and see if we can get some additional financial aid for the student if they have a FAFSA on file. So we really recommend that everyone file a FAFSA regardless of their income information. So let's look at some of the types of financial aid a student might be eligible for by filing a FAFSA. If you go to our types of aid page, this is what everybody wants: free money or gift aid. We call that scholarships and grants. And so we'll start with grants first. Really, the basic building block of a financial aid package is the federal Pell Grant. And so that is a need-based type of aid. So income information submitted on the FAFSA determine which students are eligible for Pell Grant. Normally, if a student gets a Pell Grant, they're also going to get this Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant to kind of help supplement that Pell as well. The other information on this page is for Indiana residents, and so I don't think we have any of those today, so I'm not going to really go into that in great detail. Let me go back to the previous page, and as I said, Carini talked about the merit scholarships. There are some other scholarships available to students through the departments. Many of those do have a need component. So once again, filing the FAFSA form is very important for students to see if they're going to get any of those need-based scholarships. And the merit scholarships are actually listed on the admissions website under freshman scholarships. So the high merit that Carini talked about were the trustees and presidential scholarship, and you can go out there and find out a lot more information about those scholarships as well. All right, so we have a new tool on our website, just not even a year old yet, called Scholarship Universe. Prospective students can't really use this, but once a student is admitted, they can use this tool to search for both on-campus and off-campus scholarships. Prospective or admitted students would get to that through their admissions portal. So that's a really unique tool that we're kind of really happy about, and glad that we have it out there now for students to use to look for those scholarships. That doesn't mean that's the only place they should look, though. Students should continue to use guidance counselors, look or get information from maybe family members or friends who have recently done scholarship searches for like community scholarships from your local area, or maybe your high school has a specific scholarship that you can apply for, and you want to keep all of those avenues open. And if you go online to search, make sure that you use free scholarship search engines like FastWeb or scholarship.com or finaid.org. For international students, there's a website called edupass.org, edupass.org, that has a lot of good information for international students as well. All right, so we'll go back to the previous page. So really, there are only about 3 main ways for a student and family to pay for college, but most students use a combination of all of these things that I'm going to bring up next. The first would be savings. Hopefully the family has had some time to be able to put some money away for the student to attend college. As Carini said early on, that Purdue's done a great job of freezing tuition for several years in a row now, and that's pretty unheard of in the world of higher education. But you know, it's still expensive, so hopefully the students need to, or the families have had a chance to put some money away. Maybe they have a 529 plan through their bank or credit union or some other banking institution. Those are great ways to put money aside for college. There's usually some tax benefits for doing that. And for families who didn't receive a lot of gift aid on the front end, scholarships and grants, there are actually some federal tax credits that families might be able to utilize, like the American Opportunities Tax credit and the Lifetime Learning tax credit. And if you go to the IRS website, you can learn more information about those as well. So savings, that's the first way to pay for college. The second way is to maybe spread out current earnings. And so Purdue bills on a semester by semester or term by term basis. So students not going to get a bill up front for all of their or for a whole year for all of their expenses, but they will get a bill for the whole semester from the Bursar Office of Bursar. And the Bursar actually has an installment plan that students can sign up for that will break their payments into 4 payments each semester. So that's another way to kind of spread out your current earnings along with any savings that the families put aside. Students might also be able to work. If your students are working in high school now, that's usually a way to put some money aside, or put some money aside for college. When they get here and start buying textbooks, they'll understand that, that some things are pretty expensive. And once the student is here, they may be eligible for another need-based type of aid called federal work study, where the student can get a job on campus or maybe off campus with a nonprofit agency and then earn some money that way. Now, the days of working your way through college are pretty much over. College costs have escalated too much for that, but students can certainly make enough in a part-time job to keep themselves in incidental money throughout the year, pay for some of those kind of quick, unexpected expenses, rather than call home and ask mom and dad for money all the time. And if you're not sure if a freshman student should work or not, there is some research that shows that students who work a minimal number of hours a week, somewhere 10, 12, maybe 15 hours a week, often get better grades than students who don't work at all, probably because they learn better time management skills. So, so 2 ways to pay for college that we've already discussed: savings and then spreading out current earnings. The last way is really kind of to borrow against future earnings, and that's where federal educational loans kind of come into play. I'm going to go back a slide to where we were talking about types of aid. We've got some really good information here on the federal loans that are available. Just by filing a FAFSA, a freshman student can borrow up to $5,500 in federal loans. Those are going to be in subsidized, unsubsidized category. If it's subsidized loan, the government pays the interest on that while the student's in school. If it's unsubsidized loan, the interest accrues while the student's in school. They don't have to pay either loan back until after they graduate, though. There's a 6-month grace period. Or if they drop below half-time status, so if they lay out a semester, that could possibly throw those loans into repayment. Parents might be able to borrow a federal loan called the PLUS loan. There is a credit check involved. They look at adverse credit, not total loan debt. The biggest thing we tell any student or family about borrowing is you don't want educational loans to be your only strategy for paying for college. They might be part of your strategy, but we hope they aren't your only strategy. And you should only borrow what you need and not necessarily the total amount that's offered to you. So we call scholarships and grants gift aid or free money, and then we call federal work study and educational loans self-help aid, because there are extra steps that the student has to go through to put those in place. So one other fairly new program that Purdue has that I'll mention, freshmen are not eligible for this, but upperclassmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors are. International students are not eligible for this, but it's called an income share agreement. So the difference between a loan and an ISA, with a loan, the student is borrowing a principal amount of money and they're paying that back with interest over a period of time. Might be 10 years, might be 20 years, depends on which repayment plan they choose. And there are a variety of different repayment plans through the federal government. And then there are also private educational loans that students can take out through banks and credit unions, and those have a lot of different options as well. With the income share agreement, the student would sign a contract for an amount of money they need now to pay for college now, and then they pay back with a percentage of their post-graduation income. The amount they would pay depends really on how much the contract is for, and also what degree program they're in currently, and what the potential earnings of that degree program is after they graduate. So everybody's income share agreement contract is really different and unique unto themselves. These aren't necessarily meant to replace federal loans. They're really kind of more in place for the student that maybe towards the end of their career have maxed out their loans for some reason and need some additional funds to graduate, or maybe the student has had something occur in their family situation where more of the cost of education is kind of dependent upon themselves, the student, rather than the family as a whole. So as I said, freshmen aren't eligible, but we get a lot of questions about that program because it is kind of unique. It's not actually run by our office. It's run through the Purdue Research Foundation. So if you click on our link here, we have links to the Purdue Research Foundation Back a Boiler program. They have a nice calculator on there that helps students compare which would be better, an income share agreement or the federal loan as well. So I think that's everything that I had planned to cover. I know that was a lot in a short amount of time, but I'll stop sharing here and I'll turn it back over to Karini, and I'm sure she'll wind us up.
Thank you so much, David. I am so glad that you talked about our income share agreement because and as you were talking about it, I thought about my experiences as a student, and I really could have benefited from something like that when I was, going through college. I had some like circumstances that changed as I was progressing through my degree, and I had to come up with additional funds by myself. So that was really, really tough for me, and I'm really glad that Purdue has a program like that for our students in place. And thank you so much for sharing all that information. Before we move on to like the fourth thing that I wanted to talk about, which are unique ways for students to pay for Purdue, I thought of a couple of questions and clarifying points that I wanted to emphasize. So first, David, you should be an admissions counselor because I forgot to mention our early action deadline, and I am so foolish. So in order for students to be considered for any scholarship whatsoever, it is mandatory that they have a complete application by the early action deadline, which is November 1st. We are not flexible with that deadline. Students should really not wait until the last minute to submit it because we have had years in the past where the Common App crashed and students were not able to submit their application on time. So extremely important that students complete their application by that date. The next thing that I sort of thought about as you were talking, David, was you were mentioning that the FAFSA just opened today and that families would be using their 2019 tax returns for that. Given everything that's sort of happened and changed since COVID, how will that be factored into the financial aid review process? For example, like let's say a parent lost their job in March or April of this year. Um,
Right. That's most likely going to be something we do after the FAFSA is actually filed, and then the family would contact us and ask us if or ask us about a special circumstance. So yes, if a parent lost a job and the current information or the 2019 tax information isn't reflective of their current situation, then that would probably fit into what we call a special circumstance. We would look at each case individually because it depends on how much income was actually lost in the family as a whole, and whether that would actually end up affecting the overall formulas that we use to package aid. It may or it may not, but it would be something that we would definitely look at for the family.
And then the next thing that I realized we haven't touched on yet is a lot of students ask us about, switching residencies. How do I, go from an out-of-state student to an in-state student? Do I switch residencies after a year? Unfortunately, no, that is not possible at Purdue. Students maintain the residency status that they came in under. So for example, if a student comes in as a out-of-state student, they will remain an out-of-state student throughout their years at Purdue. So it's not possible for students to request in-state residency after they've been enrolled for a year. There are specific rules and regulations about what constitutes an in-state resident versus an out-of-state resident. I would, if you have any specific questions or detailed questions about that, or if your student does, for example, I would strongly recommend reaching out to the Office of the Registrar as they have the final approval on that. They also have some information on their website as to the residency approval process as well. So I know some families have, businesses out of, like, for example, families that are on the border between Illinois and Indiana may have, a business in Indiana and they may live in Illinois or something of that sort. So these are some tricky questions, and I would just recommend reaching out to the Office of the Registrar for any clarification there. But moving on, I wanted to talk about unique Purdue ways to cut costs, right? So We mentioned our income share agreement, the backup boiler program that is entirely unique to Purdue. But we also have other opportunities besides, for example, being an RA, which we have an excellent RA program. Students are actually paid a stipend on top of paying for their room and board. But then, and on top of just traditional on-campus jobs, which are, as David said, really helpful for students. It helps them, with time management and balancing. I know I definitely had an on-campus job while I was an undergrad. I worked in the Office of Admissions, and look at me now, people. So besides those two options, which are fairly common at other institutions as well, there are some things that are quite unique to Purdue. And the first thing that I would like to share with you, here I will share my screen with you all again, is the opportunity for students to, one second. Here we go. Oh no, sorry. We can edit that out. But the opportunity for students to participate in cooperative housing. Cooperative housing is something that is unique to Purdue. Students have to be selected to be in the house. They have a recruitment process, and students can learn more information about that recruitment process via the cooperative housing website. But they're eligible for not only scholarships of more than $15,000 a year, but it can also dramatically reduce their costs of living on campus. So there are 4 cooperative houses for men and 7 for women. Students do have to help in cleaning and maintaining the house. One of the reasons why the housing opportunity, why cooperative housing is so cheap, is because there's no university staff that cleans, for example, or that cooks. So students have to take turns and be part of this community to maintain and upkeep the house. But it can be a really great way to make the cost of Purdue extremely affordable, because students can be considered not just for additional scholarships, but it's also very cheap to live in cooperative housing. So that additional $10,000 a year that a student would pay for on-campus housing is significantly decreased. So if you have students that might be interested in this kind of living arrangement, cooperative housing is a really great opportunity for them. Another opportunity that starts with co-op, get it? It's our, I'm so corny, but I love it. It's our co-op program from the Office of Professional Practice. So these are typically for our engineers, but there are co-op sessions that are also available to our CS students and some students in the College of Science. But there are several different types of co-ops. So I'm just going to do a very quick overview of the different programs here. We have, our traditional 5-session co-ops, 3-session co-ops, and these are, the 5 sessions are typically for sophomores, and the 3-session co-ops are for students beginning in their junior year. And as an example, they are working with a company. So in the case of this 5-session co-op, it's just one employer, and they go through different terms where some terms they're on campus, other terms they're working. And students are actually paid for their working session. On the College of Engineering's website, the average payment is about $18,000 per work session. So that can be a really great way to bring in additional funds into a student's Purdue experience. One of the big things about co-ops, however, is that students do end up graduating in 5 years instead of 4. That's not as bad of a deal, though, when you consider all of the professional experience that they're getting. And usually speaking, the companies for which students participate in these co-op experiences, they hire them after graduation. If they don't intend on hiring them, they let them know. But with all the work experience that they accumulated, it's quite easy for them to get a job anyways. But in the majority of cases, students are hired directly into that company. And this is a similar setup to our 3-year co-ops, our 3-session co-op session. But we also now have something new called flex co-ops, where it allows students to work at 2 companies, not just one. And this gives them a greater breadth of knowledge of their particular industry, and how 2 distinct companies work. So I think this could be really beneficial for students that are considering different options when it comes to the type of industry that they want to join into. So co-op opportunities are a great way to reduce those costs at Purdue. Excellent. So as we are wrapping up here, I just want to do a few quick highlights. So early action deadline is November 1st. In order for students to be considered for scholarships, they must have a complete application by that deadline. For the FAFSA, and David, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the deadline is March 1st, correct?
That's Purdue's priority filing date. You can actually file after that, but some types of financial aid may not be available at that point.
Mm-hmm. So in order for students to qualify for all the different things that we've talked about here, just remember that November 1, scholarship consideration, and then complete FAFSA on file by March 1st. Excellent. So if there are no additional questions, I would like to thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Danik. Thank you, David, for being here and helping us out through this. It was a pleasure having you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Great. Well, I hope you all have a great day and you take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care.